On this episode of China Unscripted, a war with China over Taiwan could be the first war fought in space. The Communist Party has a plan for that, including a plan to bomb the moon. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shirley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
And joining us today is Rick Fisher Jr. He's a weapons expert and a senior fellow with the International Assessment and Strategy Center. He's also the author of the book China's Military Modernization, Building for Regional and Global Reach. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we've talked before on this podcast about how the CCP's takeover of Taiwan is essential for its conquest of the Pacific Ocean. But you say that their takeover of Taiwan is part of a much larger ambition. What is that?
The ambition, Chris, is to be the hegemon in the Earth-Moon system. And then, as we found out in mid-August, to become the hegemon of our solar system. And after a 100-year program of extending through our solar system, I expect that if it survives, the Chinese Communist Party will also be responsible for developing ever more advanced space propulsion technologies and will be working toward the expansion of its power to nearby solar systems and beyond.
China making contact with the aliens doesn't end well. I read Three Body Problems. It's not going to go well.
Well, early in my following of this issue, monitoring Chinese web pages in the mid to late 90s, you would find that the issue of extraterrestrials was very popular in China.
Really?
It was often expressed by Chinese netizens that, oh, we're China, so the aliens are going to want to get to know us first. We're the most important. So they're looking for us. They're not looking for the other guys.
You know, I guess that makes sense because like all the American movies are about the aliens making contact with America first. So yeah, why not China first or India? But so this sounds, it sounds like a big leap. Like I think everyone can get their mind around the idea that China wants to take over Taiwan. They've talked about it. They're sending loads of military vehicles around that area. But when you're talking about other planets, like what is this based on? It starts with the moon?
Well, I think it starts ultimately with the decision of the Chinese Communist Party. And this is something that has been percolating since the early Mao Zedong era, that China must be the hegemon on Earth, that it must be the most powerful regime, militarily, economically. This ambition really began to crystallize after the 1989 Tiananmen revolt events. It was with that existential crisis for the Chinese Communist Party that, among other things, convinced them that the real threat to their dictatorship, to their power, was not so much forces within China that would tear down their legitimacy and their rule, but forces on the outside of China that would influence Chinese to undermine the legitimacy and end the dictatorship of the Chinese Communist Party. And at that point, under Mao's immediate successors, it was decided that, okay, we need to make the world safe for the Chinese Communist Party. We have to change the world so that it does not end the glorious dictatorship of the Chinese Communist Party. And as the CCP was working on all of its initial military modernization and hegemony programs in the early 1990s, just a fantastically active period of thought and planning and resource allocation and the creation of 5, 10, 50, 100-year plans, all of which are constantly updated. The Chinese very quickly figured out that hegemony on Earth would not be completely possible without ever further control of the regions away from the Earth. And they very quickly decided that control of the moon, or control of cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon, was essential to controlling low Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit, in turn, is essential to achieving victory on Earth. If you can control low Earth orbit and all the satellites that operate there, and then extend that control to medium Earth orbit, where, let's say, our GPS and the Chinese BeiDou navigation satellites reside, and also then the deeper space strategic early warning satellites of the United States and now China, you quickly come to the conclusion that, okay, we have to go to the distance. We have to go to the moon. We have to ensure that we control the moon. We control access to the moon, that we ensure that we're able to, at a minimum, exploit militarily the moon in order to control cislunar space and then low Earth orbit and then victory on Earth. But in August, there was a conference in Beijing. And at this conference, one of the chief scientists of the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, the dominant rocket, missile, and space corporation, state-owned corporation of China, basically outlined the results of a 3-year study by CASC. And the results of this study was that over 100 years, in a 100-year program, China would establish settlements on the moon, and then Mars, and then asteroids, and then moons of planets, utilizing resources on these bodies to gather water ice, other minerals, metals that are required to build things like rocket ships, and also to create the fuels and the oxygen to sustain life. And that China would create these settlements out into our solar system over the next 100 years. Now, I'm sure the listeners of China Unscripted understand instantly that the Chinese Communist Party is not just projecting its ability to explore and enrich humanity with the knowledge that it can gain by settling and populating and exploring our solar system. It is also extending its odious, horrible dictatorship to the solar system as well. And yes, if China is successful, and to be successful, it will also have to suppress the attempts by the democracies to adequately populate the moon, Mars, and beyond, that it will be the representative of humanity that very likely first encounters other forms of life and existence beyond our own solar system. Uh, this is just a compound tragedy for humanity, and it all, to me, illustrates the importance of the United States remaining a leader in the exploration of the moon, Mars, and beyond. We must never cede this high ground to the Chinese Communist Party. If we do so, we will be in a very large way condemning future generations to the same daily hell that most Chinese experience, but that the Chinese Communist Party will never explain to us.
I gotta say, I'm just imagining China trying to build this infrastructure in space, and I'm thinking about all their problems with tofu dreg constructions. Like, they can't build a skyscraper without it collapsing, and they're going to build moon colonies.
Absolutely, this is the military. The space program is controlled entirely by the People's Liberation Army, And as long as space, the moon, and beyond are identified as the high ground that must be conquered, the PLA will receive the resources to make this happen, to bring home this prize to the Chinese Communist Party leadership. They may not be able to build skyscrapers, bridges that work, but they can build rockets. They've built thousands of them to attack Taiwan. They've certainly perfected the technology to make very large liquid fueled rockets adequate to lift the payloads necessary to put people on the moon and to transport the infrastructure to support life on the moon, to support exploration, mining, and the such. And all of this will only improve as we go forward. Russia, the United States, and China are all working on the next generation of space propulsion, which today is largely nuclear propulsion. But something will come along that's better rather quickly, probably in the next decade, and something even better in the decade after that. So the limits of our imagination, which for me at my age was Star Trek and the such. That could actually happen. At this point, the Chinese Communist Party will be there, provided we survive with enough strength as well to continue in the same quest.
Well, so you made an interesting point that for China to dominate space, it will have to prevent other countries from having access to space, like the United States, India, maybe even Russia. How would China prevent other countries from developing their space programs?
Well, let's just look at what they're doing. In September of 2022, one of the few remaining Chinese academic journals that you can still access online, that you don't have to go through CNKI, which is now denied, or be a resident of China in order to access. The Journal of Deep Space Exploration published an article that was essentially about how and why China should put radar on the moon. And the reasons why were to monitor cislunar space, but also to monitor the Lagrangian points. If this is an essential concept of space geostrategy. The Lagrangian point, and I think there's like 5 of them in our little Earth Moon system. These are points of equal gravitational pull that sort of like if you go there, you can sort of like tread water in space, and because of that property, it is easier to put a satellite or a manned space station or an unmanned or manned military space station to monitor and then fire weapons to control access to the Earth Moon system. So not only do we see articles about putting radar on the moon, we also see articles about how China should be putting its own constellation of observation, navigation, and communication satellites around the moon so that it can control really access to the moon for other countries that want to buy into it. It's sort of like buying into Huawei or ZTE for the moon. It's probably a lot cheaper than Elon Musk's future Starlink for the moon, if we suppose that happens. And lots the countries that are joining the Chinese Moon Coalition will find this very attractive. And yes, the United States and China are building political, scientific, technical coalitions, competing coalitions to go forward on the moon. The United States has its Artemis Accords coalition of about, I think now, up to 28 countries. And China, just in the last couple of weeks, I think has signed on its 4th member, Thailand, and before that, I believe South Africa, and then Venezuela, Russia, and China. These are coalition. The Chinese coalition will largely be paid for by China. Venezuela. Can Venezuela afford to put astronauts on the moon? But the dictator there, Maduro, during his mid-August visit to China, announced that China was going to put a Venezuelan on the moon. Was going to train a Venezuelan, put that person on the moon. This is fantastical stuff, yes, but it is a brutal illustration of the resources that China is willing to expend to achieve moon dominance on the way to achieving cislunar space dominance, low Earth orbit dominance, and Earth dominance.
How much of a priority is this for the PLA? Because as you mentioned, this is a lot of resources.
It's a very high priority.
Like, how would you rank it in terms of like?
Because they need to get Taiwan first.
Well, yes, they need to get Taiwan first, and I'll explain why that's important. But the priority here, I mean, they're sort of probably the same. And yes, the resources dedicated to moon control is not yet as high as Taiwan control, displacing the United States, and achieving global hegemony. But the amount of after Taiwan is taken and can be exploited, then the resources that will be devoted to moon control and beyond will grow very fast. The war against Taiwan is important because controlling the first island chain is essential for many things, to include securing the Wenchang Satellite Launch Center, the main satellite launch projection center for the PLA to the moon and beyond. Wenchang is on Hainan Island. And because of its much lower latitude, it's easier to put payloads into space. And that makes it essential. It's the only space launch center that is being built to support launches to the moon and beyond. They'll probably build multiple centers on Wenchang. Wenchang is currently being expanded to include a launch site for so-called private Chinese space launch companies. They're not private. Everything is controlled by the PLA. But securing Wenchang requires control of Taiwan. Control of Taiwan is necessary to secure the South China Sea and also to secure Hainan Island. Controlling Taiwan is necessary to then go after the Ryukyu Islands, take them from Japan so that those islands don't become the threat that they are, or remain the threat that they are, to Chinese dominance in East Asia, the South China Sea, and then the Indian Ocean and Africa. And yes, then the Atlantic Ocean, and then Latin America. But they're also going to Latin America through the South Pacific. So it's mutually supporting here. But control of low Earth orbit is absolutely essential to achieving this whole plan. And securing low Earth orbit requires securing medium Earth orbit, cislunar space, and then control of the moon.
So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing when it comes to taking over Taiwan, though, right? Because like in a PLA invasion of Taiwan, one of the factors that's sort of newish in the scope of big wars is control of space, right? Which is the U.S. has its navigational satellites and military communication satellites, and China has their own versions of those things also in space. And that's, I imagine, going to be a much bigger factor during the actual process of the PLA's attempt to take over Taiwan, right?
Any war now would be a space war in some way.
Yeah. And it's also very easy to basically take out low Earth orbit. You blow up, 20, 40 enemy satellites. You'll create so much debris that low Earth orbit will essentially be useless to everybody, which is why going deeper into space makes increasing strategic sense for all of the spacefaring powers.
Right, but if China blows up, say, 40 satellites in low Earth orbit, creating a massive debris field of, these small particles traveling at 10,000 miles an hour through space, doesn't that make it hard for China to then launch new things into space without having to go through this dangerous debris field?
Well, you could harden a space launch vehicle, so make the so that the you can steer your way through thin points in the debris field. The rocket can be hardened so that it can withstand some degree of damage. I mean, if the rocket is, let's say, going as fast as the debris, then it's not striking the rocket in a highly damaging way, and you can get above it and beyond. It's a solvable problem if your intention is to take out low Earth orbit for everybody.
And didn't China, was that in 2008 or 2009 where they did shoot down one of their satellites in 2007? And yeah, they did manage to shoot down a low Earth orbit satellite, and it did create kind of a debris field. It's still a problem today, correct?
And they also made 4 or 5 other demonstration flights to prove that they could get their interceptor close enough to destroy the satellite. The 2007 was their simply their power demonstration event. But unfortunately, our government didn't inform us about the previous attempts until afterwards.
Well, so this is very interesting to me. The way that the CCP is trying to cover their sinister space plans with propaganda. I'm just thinking of Hollywood movies like Gravity or what was the one
Valerian.
with Matt Damon? Well, yeah, Valerian with Down City, but I'm thinking the Matt Damon one.
The Martian, where
The
like
Martian.
He needs help from the China's civilian space program.
Exactly, and then, but yeah, like Valerian, City of 1,000 Planets, where this whole space city is created essentially from an original Chinese space capsule.
Oh yeah, the Sandra Bullock movie where her life is saved by being able to get into the Chinese space station and all that. This is all rort. I mean, the real movie that should have been made, I would suggest, was of the 2008 Shenzhou 7 mission. The first manned Shenzhou mission in 2003 was actually the astronaut was the secondary payload. The primary payload of the first manned Chinese spaceflight were 2 large optical cameras that were, spying, taking pictures. The astronaut was just along for the ride in the pictures. But in 2007, that Shenzhou mission was really insidious. It was their first spacewalk. The first time they sent a guy in a spacesuit outside of the hull of the spaceship. But after that mission was done, the guy climbs back into the Shenzhou, and then it launches a microsatellite. 200-pound little satellite. And it goes out in front of the Shenzhou just as it is passing within 45 kilometers of the International Space Station. Now, there were 3 people on the ISS at that time, 2 Russians and an American. And this was a deliberate attempt by China to demonstrate that it could shoot down the ISS. When this was happening, it was kind of being called out first on a Russian space web chat page, and then the Chinese picked this up. I found it first on the Chinese pages, traced it back to the Russian page, and I think the next day sent a question to the press office at NASA. Hey, did you know that these guys are saying that they just basically fired a satellite that passed within a very dangerous distance of the ISS? And the press office says, we have to check with the strategic command about this. And a day later, yep, confirmed. This thing passed within the box. If something violates this box around the ISS, they are required to move the ISS. Now, I don't think they moved it, but what they didn't do was comment on this Chinese action. They did not issue a press release. They did not condemn the Chinese for what they had just done. I mean, I was attacked on liberal web pages after that for pointing all this out, being extreme, exaggeration, Fisher, conservative, bad. But I mean, it still stands out to me as an early example of China's willingness to not just attack a manned space outpost of the democracies, but to use its manned space program to perform not just military, but deadly military missions in space.
I brought up the movies. This is why I brought up the movie thing, because China's trying to send this message to, I guess, particularly Americans, that China's space program, it's just like NASA. It's civilian, it's harmless, it's just man going to the final frontier.
It
But-
kind of is like what they did with their Antarctica program, right? Like using the whole like everybody's there for scientific exploration thing.
Except nobody makes movies out about Antarctica, except for The Thing, but that's a very different thing. What is the difference between America's civilian NASA and China's space program?
Well, for the longest time, at least, the American program deliberately sought to create a firewall between its activities and the American military. When the space shuttle came along, that firewall descended at certain points because we needed the space shuttle to put heavy military payloads into space. And there are many missions of the space shuttle that performed classified or space missions for which there was very little commentary. At least the attempt was made by the United States to separate military space from civilian space and to at least create the opportunity for the world to follow and say, okay, all right, space can remain civilian, military activities, okay, but at least they're over here where they're identifiable, where there perhaps more transparency. We can make sure that there's a balance of space power so that it's not used against us and other democracies. But there's no such pretense. The Chinese program began as a search for military advantage to develop militarily useful technologies, and its continued control by the People's Liberation Army ensures that at every level possible, it produces dual use benefits. Yes, the glorious Chinese astronauts go to orbit, do great things, eat bubbles of juice in space and all that good stuff. But the space station itself is basically a stolen design from Russia. That an interesting story, but it's designed to mirror the old Russian Mir space station. Mir meaning peace, but the Mir space station, as Russian histories make clear, was going to be a military battle station in space. It was going to have modules that could dock to it and then go off in other directions and actually bomb targets on Earth. And in my opinion, the Chinese have prepared to use their space station in the same way. It will have modules that can detach and new modules can reattach, and they don't have to tell us that the new modules contain laser weapons or bombs to attack the Earth. And the space station will also have kind of a little doggy following it, a space telescope. It's kind of a large object, but one day the Chinese will announce, "Oh, our space telescope is malfunctioning. We have to replace it with a new one." And lo and behold, the space telescope looks just like what a large laser weapon would look like in space as well. And just to be sure, the institutes that make most of the parts of the space telescope are also expert in making laser weapons, and they've already made public proposals for chemically powered laser weapons in space.
So like I know what lasers do in the movies, but what would a laser weapon do in reality if they could have one?
Well, there's no atmosphere in space, so you lose less energy. But now with you would need maybe a multi-megawatt laser. Right now we're on the cusp of maybe a 300 kilowatt laser. The Chinese are selling 30 and maybe 50, maybe even 100 kilowatt lasers. But a 30 kilowatt laser on Earth can penetrate layers of steel at about a kilometer. But in space, a laser can also damage with its high light and energy. It can damage optical surveillance systems, basically, destroy them without putting a hole in the satellite. But when you get to 300 megawatt, when you're 300 kilowatts, or even a megawatt, then you're talking about the ability to actually punch a hole in the metal, provided you can get close enough. And the more powerful the laser, the less the requirement to achieve that proximity. Right now, both the United States, Russia, and China have satellites that can intercept co-orbitally, meaning they can go right up to the side of a target satellite, and they have arms that can grab the target satellite. If it's your satellite, then you'd want to be able to do that to repair it, maybe refuel it. But if it's the enemy satellite, all you have to do is grab it and then toss it out of orbit, and it's basically a mission kill. The satellite can no longer perform its function.
Well, so we've kind of covered what China's plans are for low Earth orbit. From being able to create debris fields to setting up their own space stations. Beyond that, then, is the moon. China has already been sending a lot of rovers to the moon, one in 2013, one in 2019, 2020. They have plans for 2030. How is China going to use the moon?
Well, the example of the radar station is something that they've been thinking about, at least for quite a while. I would estimate that project is at least 20 years old. When the project reaches a point where it's mentioned in a major journal article, that means it's advanced quite a bit, at least within the theoretical stage, and it's on the cusp of being funded by the PLA. So by 2029, China will begin sending people to the moon. The people will meet a number of unmanned moon systems that have radar, have optical surveillance systems, and a lot of other different systems to perform basic exploration, determine what's in the moon soil, look for lunar ice. China will have a moon hopper, kind of a sub-satellite for the moon that will take off from the landing site, travel 30, 40 kilometers, and then land in the dark shadow of a moon crater, where a lot of this lunar ice is suspected of residing. If they can find the lunar ice, then they can begin to process oxygen and maybe even rocket fuels. And that is a goal in order to enable travel back to the Earth or travel to Mars. But this all could become obsolete if nuclear powered space travel is perfected in the next few years.
For our listeners who aren't familiar with the sort of water to fuel theory, so water can be H2O, can be divided into H2 and O2 essentially. You'd have to power that electrolysis somehow, but you basically get hydrogen for fuel and oxygen for breathing, and also for essentially feeding fuel. right? So all you basically need is water and energy, and you can have this, right?
Yes. Both the United States and China are working on small nuclear power plants for the moon. So that would be the source of enough power. But fashioning a factory is the next step, and the factory would basically receive the regolith carried by some kind of earth mover, a regolith mover. It would go to the crater, bring the regolith back to the factory. The factory, powered by the nuclear power plant, would then process the regolith, separate out the ice, and then turn the ice into, yes, O2 and H2. The H2 could be a fuel almost immediately. And you combine that with the oxygen, liquid oxygen, and you have a fuel cycle to achieve wherever or to get wherever you need to go. But the oxygen is also very necessary to sustain life on workers on the moon as well.
The moon is a harsh mistress.
Is there anything to kind of prevent the Chinese Communist Party from basically colonizing the moon? You're describing it as.
Well, it would require our violating our own principles. I mean, since the mid 1960s, the United States, the Europeans have been leading a diplomatic effort in the United Nations and other places. The 67 Moon Treaty, Outer Space Treaty, and then a kind of non-binding Moon Treaty have tried to create a set of principles that nations that go to the moon should strive to follow. Transparency, no violence, no weapons, things like that. All of which was repeated in the Trump administration's Artemis Accord that has been signed onto by really the leading non-dictatorship spacefaring countries. So we've gone the distance to try to create the political basis for avoiding conflict and war on the moon. Now, China will say and has said, of course, we agree with all of this, but oh yeah, don't look at this radar on the moon that's essentially part of our Earth Moon system control apparatus, and also don't make any fuss when we start bombing the moon in the course of going to the moon.
That's the question I've been wanting to get to for this whole podcast. You say China might want to bomb the moon?
Yes.
Why? Why?
If you're able to use the first illustration I sent you, the Chinese within the last 3 years have begun to gradually reveal their sort of early moon architecture, how they're going to get to the moon, and for about almost 3 years, they've been revealing slowly the principles and what their moon lander is going to look like. The moon lander is very much influenced by the Soviet concept of the late 1960s called the Lunar Koryabl, or their moon lander. Essentially, the Soviet concept was to have a two-stage moon lander. There's the manned stage that only carried one guy, but that was attached to a booster. And the booster performed most of the descent burn. It would slow the moon lander from about 5,000 miles an hour down to 250 miles an hour. And then, having done so, the booster would detach and then crash into the moon about 2 to 4 kilometers away from where the manned moon lander lands on the moon. So every time the Soviets would have gone to the moon, the booster for their moon lander would have crashed into the moon. If an American Apollo landing site was nearby, we were in danger of being hit by this unguided booster that was going to crash into the moon. Now, this is what the Chinese are going to be doing. Their manned moon lander that'll carry 2 astronauts also uses a booster to decelerate, to begin its descent to the moon, and to slow down the manned moon lander to this basic 200 to 250 mile an hour speed, down from 5,000 miles an hour. And then the booster is going to detach. Just within the last week, Chinese internet posters who managed whose postings managed to get to the key Chinese space following Twitter accounts have revealed that there's another article out by the Journal of Deep Space Exploration that essentially confirms that the Chinese will be using this method to put their people on the moon. That there will be a booster that slows down the moon lander and then detaches from it and crashes into the moon. Now, the moon's big. If something crashes 2 or even 4 kilometers away, is that really a big deal? Something to be alarmed about? Fisher, are you exaggerating here? Maybe not, because China and the United States and now India have all targeted the south pole of the moon for early exploration. That's where we believe most of the lunar ice exists. And the Chinese have also picked up, they've located about 50 locations on the moon that are kind of on their list of places to go. And they've put them all on a map. And yeah, the South Pole area is well populated. And we've known this from previous disclosures by Chinese space officials. They have 10 or 13 locations on the South Pole that they're targeting in their early moon exploration phase. And a couple of these locations are also of interest by the United States, and we've identified them as well. So the chance of an American moon landing base being very close to the Chinese base is real. And if that happens, well, the Chinese method of going to the moon could turn into a threat to the American moon base. And we should be talking about this. NASA should be highlighting this. NASA should be asking public questions. Is this how China is going to the moon? Or are they going to be bombing us every time they send a manned moon lander, or a large moon rover, or a piece of a manned moon base to the moon? Because all of this is coming out in Chinese PowerPoint briefings and journal articles and even press articles that are beginning to explain the early Chinese moon architecture. But these revelations have been going on for a number of years. But Western space officials, and particularly American space officials, who should understand this, are really saying nothing about this danger, and that really irks me.
Well, this is what I've been wondering the whole time that you've been talking about this, is what
Well,
is
well,
the
hold on,
response?
Shelley. Real quick, yeah, because I'm sorry, I had to interrupt your question to talk about bombing the moon. But yeah, you asked a good question about how do we stop this.
Well, I mean, yeah, like but before, how do we stop this? Like, what has the response even been? Like, NASA hasn't. I had no idea that they were talking about bombing the moon. Like, is it that there's skepticism towards that these are the actual plans, or is it like a kind of?
Or it's because they're technically not bombs. They're just like pieces of equipment that are going to fall and act kind of like a bomb.
Or even without the bombing thing, just like what their plans are for domination of space or whatever. Is it that we just don't think that we're not taking it seriously? What is the response of the United States?
Well, I think over the last, I'd say, 20, 25 years, you have had real tension between, let's say, the warriors and the diplomats. Especially under the Obama administration, there was a kind of high illusion that we could get on in space like with the Chinese, like we were getting on with the Russians. And the Russians basically had a temporary plan. Okay, we can't afford a space station, so if we get the Americans to pay for most of it, we'll glom onto their space station. And if they pay for space taxi rides, all the better. But now that this is no longer useful to them because they want to retake and control Europe again, the space cooperation with Russia is over. It's all but ended formally. So you had under Obama a cabal of officials who thought, okay, if we can establish peace with China in space, then maybe we have a better chance of achieving space or peace on Earth. Well, that never worked with the Soviet Union. It didn't work with Russia. It certainly isn't going to work with China. If China doesn't want to get along with us in peace on Earth, it certainly is not going to get along in peace in space. So, but the illusion persisted. Now, the warriors understood all of this, and but they also understood that if we, the Americans, militarize space, if we put weapons in space, then the other guys are going to do that too. So we have to be very careful. What we've put up in terms of weapons, if we have, is all very classified, and we don't talk about it. When the Chinese reach a certain point, we'll really have no choice but to talk about it and to start either acknowledging that we have weapons or space, or actually to begin to put them up there. The era of peace in space will officially be over until the Chinese Communist Party or its successor decides, no, we really need peace in space in order to fully benefit from the moon, Mars, and beyond. We're not there yet. The Chinese Communist Party wants dominance. It understands space dominance is required for Earth dominance. So that's its trajectory. Now, when will we begin defending ourselves from the Chinese threat? When they go to the moon and bomb the moon, that's going to be a wake up. But we don't have to wait that long. The Chinese are basically telling us that they're going to be bombing the moon like their Long March 5 boosters bomb the Earth. They send these big boosters into low Earth orbit. They just circle around until they hit the Earth somewhere. Nobody knows where. The Chinese don't invest in the means to control those boosters after they've accomplished their mission. They don't bring them down in a safe area. They just let them go until they hit something. That's essentially what they're doing on the moon as well. They're just letting these boosters go until they hit something. And if you happen to be in the way, well, they'll come up with all kinds of justifications to make it our fault. With this Chinese attitude, the United States is justified saying, okay, well, perhaps we need dual use capabilities to defend ourselves. The laser that will be mining minerals on the moon's surface, if it's pointed to the stars, might actually defend us from this bombing Chinese moonlander booster. So I think we're perfectly capable of doing what's necessary to defend ourselves without fully violating the sort of Artemis Accord principles that we've set out. But to do so will kind of just let all the cats out of the bag. The Chinese will look at this and accuse us of militarization immediately. Of course, they're going to do the same thing. And the coalition that we've managed to join together will all stand up and say, hey, look, the Chinese and the Americans are prepared to shoot at each other. Do we really want to be in the middle of all this? Maybe we need our own coalition centered around another space power, maybe Europe. But in reality, all of the space powers will be threatened. And they will have to then make choices. Do we defend our people millions of miles away from Earth, or do we somehow proceed with the illusion that the Chinese aren't going to bomb us first.
Oh, I was gonna say, when you say it's an illusion, it seems. Are you saying that there are people who see that there is a threat within the U.S. government or something like that? Like they are not just kind of being like, okay, it's not a problem if China, continues to colonize the moon.
Well, what we hear so far from NASA Director Nelson and others is the accusation that China is not transparent about its ambitions on the moon. They will go that far. They will make that accusation. But I think they understand politically that if they publicly accuse the Chinese of preparing for military activities on the moon, then the question is going to come back to them. Okay, Director Nelson, uh, uh, President Biden, what are you doing to defend our people on the moon? And then kind of the political campaign to create and defend the principle of peaceful behavior on the moon then collapses. And then we have to spend time and effort to explain to all our partners that we tried but we failed. And if you're afraid of getting caught in the next Cold War on the moon, where it's also very very cold to begin with, then you can go. We release you. We lose the investment that we've made in defending a regime, a potential regime of peace on the moon. And so I think our space leaders are reluctant to give that up. Now we have a space force. The space force is its mission is to protect Americans and American interests in space, and that includes the moon and beyond. Are they thinking about what the Chinese are doing and their implications? Well, they wouldn't be earning their paychecks if they didn't. So if it's obvious to me, it's very likely it's obvious to them. But they're just not talking about it because of this political problem. If we let the cat out of the bag that no, there's just not going to be any peace on the moon. China is bringing its conflicts on Earth to the moon and beyond, and we have to be prepared to meet this in order to defend ourselves and defend our access and defend our rights and all that. Then it's a downer. It's politically it could be a hard sell. I think not, but it's discordant, and it forces all of the effort that's been invested in trying to create this potential regime of peace on the moon for naught. And they're not yet ready to give that up. But when they are, I expect that the Space Force uh, will have some interesting things to say, and perhaps be proposing some very interesting programs as well.
Well, it seems to me that the best thing the U.S. could do to prevent China's space ambitions is to just make sure they don't take Taiwan, because if they can't take Taiwan, they're not going to take Mars.
Yes, Taiwan is the first battle in China's war, probably decades of wars for global hegemony. If Taiwan remains free, then in a large sense, the bottle or the cork remains in the bottle. Yeah, China's space ambitions can be checked with simple, near, not very difficult moves on Earth. If they start attacking our satellites in space, then, in my opinion, all of China's space launch centers will immediately become open game. Uh, the Wenchang Center is right on the coast of Hainan Island. Uh, no big deal to approach and destroy without killing a lot of people. The space launch sites inside China are kind of in the center of China, so it'll take more effort. The political price will be a little higher, but yeah, the Chinese will be attacking our space launch and control centers on Earth as well. So yeah, it'll be nasty. A Taiwan war will instantly become a war for control of low Earth orbit, and all space launch and control centers, including the Strategic Support Forces Space Control Base in Argentina, and the one they want to build in Antarctica. If the one in Antarctica is built, I think we'll be attacking that as well. Again, another regime of peace, the Antarctic Treaty, will come tumbling down.
Which the CCP has already been exploiting that. But so it sounds like from what you're saying that if a war for Taiwan goes hot, that already will bring in space, low Earth orbit. And basically at that point, the genie's out of the bottle, and then space is very clearly a new battleground for war.
Most definitely. And we're kind of fooling ourselves in the meantime. We should be preparing in every way that we can afford for this new theater of conflict, real conflict, and because it's going to be upon us as soon as the Taiwan War starts. And yeah, we're going to need the means to take out Chinese satellites just as soon as they're taking out our satellites. And we have the means to attack the Chinese global Earth-based space tracking and control network, and we're going to have to do that within the first moments of the war. If they can't control their satellites, then they can't benefit from them, and that will help us to terminate the war on the Taiwan Strait in a far more rapid manner, lose with much less loss of life.
And I think this is why this conversation is so important, because to me, I think when people hear about, China taking over Mars or meeting aliens, that all sounds like very far-fetched or far into the future. It's like it's become sci-fi. But when you talk about if they invade Taiwan, immediately space is involved. It becomes much more of a present danger.
Absolutely. We simply need to be prepared for this fight. I hope that we have taken some measures, and that we don't talk about them is completely justified at this stage in sort of space politics. But that stage will evaporate as soon as the Taiwan War begins.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. That was a fascinating interview, I felt. I love space stuff. But don't you think the real danger is that if war breaks out in space, the governments of the world will no longer be able to hide the fact that the Earth is a flat disk?
Well, most of the space station concepts that we've seen are flat disks, so perhaps somebody's world will be flat. Not ours per se, but somebody's.
Well, at least China can flatten the moon with its bombs. Thank you very much for joining us. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Oh, and if anyone wanted to see more of your work, where can they follow you?
I'm a columnist for the Taipei Times. I've written extensively for Epoch Times. That's where I'm publishing recently.
Well, great. Been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Chang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
And I've got a message for Xi Jinping before I sign off. Pay attention, Xi. Swear not by the moon, the inconsistent moon, that monthly changes in her circled orb, lest thy love prove likewise variable. See you next time.